Hey YouTube, it's a Theban Gamer and welcome to this tutorial on how to make a balanced deck with the US side and Broken Arrow beta. So in the beta, you do have access to two specializations from the US out of the six that they're promising. One of them is going to be the US Marine Corps, so a pretty balanced specialization. And the second one is going to be the Armored Brigade. So we're going to go through both specializations. We're going to go through some of the units and we're going to go through how to create a balanced deck. So the reason why I say balanced deck is because you want a deck that can sort of attack and defend, right? A deck that can do multiple things and that can respond to any threat, because there's going to be different types of builds. People are going to have builds that are more armor focused. They're going to have more air drop builds, right? They're going to have different types of builds, and you need a balanced deck to sort of fight through all those builds. So for the US, we're going to choose the two specializations we have available, and we're going to get into creating a deck. As you can see, again, you have our 6 categories. Our recon category: infantry, vehicle, support, helicopter, and air. We're going to go through all the categories, and we're going to go through some of the good units that make up a balanced army, right? So different units do different things, and we're going to go through what these units do and how you can create a balanced army and ultimately win more matches in Broken Arrow. So if we go to recon tab, again, you're going to notice that we have our staple recon infantry, and each of these infantry does slightly different things. They do also have their Russian counterparts, so keep in mind that. We also have vehicles for the recon tab, and these recon vehicles are going to have more sight lines. Some of them are going to have anti-tank capabilities. You even do get a recon tank over here, and we're going to go over how you can use these recon tanks. So if you look at the infantry here, we see that we have cavalry scouts. These guys are onboard a javelin, and even though they only have 3 missiles, they're pretty potent. They do not have top attacks, so keep that in mind. But they're going to be useful in terms of harassing enemy armor. Not necessarily taking out, let's say, too many tanks just because they don't have a lot of ammo, but they're going to be harassing the enemy and sort of keeping them at bay and keeping them on their toes. Here we have Force Recon. Force Recon are pretty good in the fact that you have multiple different ways to use them. So you have the Green Ops, which is basically standoff, and then you have the close range Force Recon for clearing buildings. So both of these are useful. I like the long range Force Recon, but these are going to be basically your mainline recon infantry, scouting the battlefield, sort of fighting in force a little bit, and finding out where the enemy is. Scout snipers. These guys are a hidden gem within Broken Arrow. So they're really good at harassing enemy supply points. They're good at keeping tabs on enemy without them keeping tabs on you. Here you can see that they have better stealth. They have 3 stealth as opposed to the 1 to 1.5 most units have. So they're very hard to spot unless you're very close to them with another recon unit. So they also have an anti-tank or anti-vehicle rifle here, and I'd recommend actually putting that on. As you can see with the vehicles, we have the IFAV. So this is basically just a little buggy, and you can equip this buggy with a grenade launcher and even a tow. So very, very useful in terms of setting up ambushes, sort of trying to flank enemy armored forces and keeping tabs on the enemy as well. And it has good stealth as well. The recon tanks. So why would you use a recon tank? Because it is pretty expensive. Well, recon tanks are good because they allow you to pair a recon tank with regular tank units and basically launch an armored assault where you have good recon capability. So this tank is pretty decent as a tank as well. The only downside to this recon tank is that it's very costly. So 350 points, that's a lot for what you're getting. You're not even getting active protection. So this is best used with other regular tanks to start an armored assault. And then we have, again, our Bradley Recon, and then just a pure recon vehicle. So if we want a balanced recon army, we're going to include infantry and some recon vehicles in this army. I'm going to include one of the cavalry scouts just for some anti-armor capability. I'm going to include at least 2 Force Recon just so we have the infantry capability and we have the ability to sort of fight in forest with our recon units. And I'm going to include 2 scout snipers, and I'm going to include the anti-tank rifle on them. So with my recon units, I basically want them to be quick as opposed to more deadly. So I'm going to give these recon units Humvees. And I believe you can put some better guns on the Humvees, but I'm not going to waste my money. And so I'm going to include more Force Recons here, 2 snipers, and then the cavalry scouts, I think I'll include 2 as well. And for the cavalry scouts, I'll just give them the M113. Because honestly, again, I don't want my recon units necessarily engaging in frontline combat unless they have to, right? So you want them sort of at a distance and sort of observing the enemy and then engaging when it's appropriate, not necessarily in just an all-out brawl. As we can see here, again, we have many different options. I'm going to include the recon tank here, and I'm going to actually include 2 of them. And the reason why is for the U.S., you have great armored units. And so having recon tanks that can sort of lead the spearhead and identify those hidden enemy units is going to be very, very useful. So I'm going to include these tanks in this build right here. But again, if you don't want to include tanks, I would recommend this small buggy right here, this IFAV, because this buggy armed with the tow missile is very deadly to vehicles, is very, very effective as well. So I would definitely include that if you can. Infantry. For the U.S. side, infantry is actually more important than the Russian side because it makes up a larger percentage of your army, and they just have better, more effective infantry units. The most effective infantry unit right now in the beta is this dragon unit, in my opinion, because they have 2 dragons, they have 2 Browning 50 cals, and then they have the regular riflemen, and they have 8 units in a squad. They're very, very effective at holding ground. I would take that back that they're the most effective, but they're one of the most effective in the beta. And I'm going to include them with this armored transport because it's about the same price as the other transport. It's a little bit slower. So I'm going to include all 4 of these because these guys are very, very good at holding ground. And so I'm going to include another defensive unit, and that's going to be the tow team. And them, I'm going to put them in a Humvee just because I don't really need them in terms of an armored assault. I just want them in a Humvee. And with the tows, the unique, they bring out one of the unique parts about the U.S. faction, which is you get top attack munitions. The Russians do not get these. So I'm going to include the top attack feature on these because that makes tow units absolutely deadly. The top attack units absolutely melts tanks away without any active protection. So if tanks don't have active protection, they have no way of resisting the top attack. So top attack, very, very useful for the U.S. side. Now, you can still, if you want a little bit cheaper, you can go to the TOW 2A. This has good penetration, but it's not as effective as the top attack. The U.S. also has offensive infantry, and they have very good offensive infantry. So as we can see, we have Marine Raiders. These guys are very, very good, and they can be both standoff and close range. I'm going to include the close range because I want them to kick down doors. So I'm going to include all 4 of these as well. And you're seeing I'm being very liberal with the amount of infantry just because the U.S. has such good infantry. Regular Marines. These guys are a great frontline unit, and they're very good in the assault. They have 3 grenade launchers, guys. That's absolutely insane for Marines. So I'm going to include at least 2 of these Marines. Let's see what else we have here. So we do have AA units, but it's not that good in terms of the Stinger. Because if you look, you only get 3 Stingers. That's actually not that great. So I'm actually going to pass on the Stinger. Instead, what I'm going to take is I'm going to take these mechanized riflemen. Now, the mechanized riflemen themselves, they're actually not that good. Their RPG is pretty awful. Honestly, almost unusable to be honest. But what they do have is they have access to the Bradley. And the Bradley is the best IFV in the game just because you get these tow missiles with it. And let me see if I can get the newer Bradley. You can get an Iron Fist active protection system. So it's one of the best IFVs in the game. You get, again, a good amount of tow missiles. You can even get a better engine, but for now I'm not really going to do that. You also have the armor package for the Bradley, but I am going to include at least one of these. Let me see, can I squeeze in 2? I cannot. So let me shuffle a little bit. I'll take maybe 1 less Raider. If I can include 2 of these. Right, so as you can see in infantry, you want both defensive infantry, so the anti-tank infantry and the machine gun infantry, and you want offensive infantry, which is the mainline riflemen, right, and the IFV infantry, right, the mechanized infantry. So I have a pretty good mix here. They do have sort of specialty infantry, like for example the Stingers, but in this case the U.S. Stingers are so bad just because they just don't have range and they don't have good ammo that I'm not going to include them in my build, but you can if you want to. Vehicles. So vehicles, for the U.S., you have access to very, very heavily armored tanks, and that's basically the specialty for the U.S. Marine Corps. So again, you have different tiers of tanks. I'm not going to go to the exact different tiers, but you basically just have your medium tanks for the U.S. They don't really deviate too much for this current build. And you have your anti-tank as well. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to try to take the M182 SEP V3. This is going to be my super heavy tank once I upgrade it, and I'm going to upgrade it to the most you can. So I'm going to upgrade it to the Tusk 2 with trophy. system. The trophy system is going to allow you active protection. And it's going to be very effective in shooting those RPGs. And the US has a lot of units that can use active protection. So I'm going to use the SEP V2. And I'm going to put active protection on this one as well. Plus, I'm going to do the Tusk 1 package just because I want the tank to be a little bit more affordable. And I'm going to include at least 2 of those. Now I want a cheap tank. So for the cheap tanks, the M60A1 is basically the best option. And I'm going to include 4 of these M60A1s. Another cheap tank, a good option, is the HC over here. You can include some armor. So I'm going to include the side armor just so we can get better side armor. And I'm going to include, let's see if we can get 4 of these in here. So now I have my cheap tank. Now I do want to add an anti-tank capability as well. So I want to add specifically anti-tank capability. So I'm going to switch and I'm going to choose this LAV-AT. But the LAV-AT also has top attack, guys. Absolutely insane. Like, honestly, it's not fair that this top attack is in the game because it absolutely melts enemy tanks. So I'm definitely going to include this. Let's see if I can get 2. And that's going to be 2 tanks exactly. So if you look, I have my heavy mainline tanks that are going to be good for the breakthrough. My light tanks, which back up the heavy tanks. They can't really take damage, but that's okay. And then I have my sort of, just cheaper tank that I can use to sort of fill out the armory and sort of back up the heavy tanks as well. Plus anti-tank capability with the LAV with top attack, guys. Top attack's absolutely insane. And let me see. I don't think that this one gets top attack, but again, when these top attack anti-tanks are absolutely devastating, and they're, they definitely change the balance against the Russians. So I definitely use top attack munitions when you have it. If we go to our support for the U.S., they don't have as good support, but they still have effective support. So one bad thing the U.S. lacks is good supply vehicles. This one is a little bit too slow for my liking, so I'm going to use the LAV supply. It doesn't carry a lot, but it's still good. I'm going to use the LVSR. This one's good for dropping off large amounts of supply, and that'll be my supply core. For air defense, I'm going to choose 4 of these. The LAV air defense is one of the best air defense in the beta right now. Why? Because it's so quick. This thing moves at full speed and can really traverse the map extremely quickly. So this thing is very, very effective. They do have the M6A2 linebacker, but the problem with this thing is it's just so slow. It's about half the speed of the LAV, so I don't really carry it. Another great thing the U.S. has is the PAC 2 air defense systems. I'm going to switch this. I'm going to put 4 missiles. And this air defense absolutely destroys aircraft extremely quickly. So I'm going to include 2 of these air defenses just because of how effective they are. Now the U.S.'s main specialty is rocket artillery. You can include this tube artillery for the Paladin or a mortar, but I honestly would only, I'd only include it if you want that specific capability of just harassing the enemy. But instead, I would just skip to the MLRS, so HIMARS and MLRS. The HIMARS has more range, and you even have access to ATACMS, which is very, very good for hitting the enemy where it hurts. But I'm going to choose the M270, and I'm going to choose 2 of these. So let me see. That's going over, so I guess I can't. So I'm going to choose 2 M70s. These guys have 12 rockets, and are very effective at hitting the enemy where it hurts. Very, very good unit. So I do have a couple more points, so I'm going to add another Patriot. It looks like I can't. So I do have, again, a little bit more points to spend, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 1 tube artillery. Just to have it, because you have the points to spend. Really, again, I'm probably not going to use it in the game, but it's still good to harass the enemy and make them sort of move units if you want them to move it. But this is a very good support for the U.S. You have your supply, you have your air defense, and you have your rocket artillery and tube artillery. So very, very balanced in support, and it's going to help you deal with a lot of threats. If we go to helicopters, this is somewhere where the current factions in the U.S. are actually a little bit weaker. The good thing is you have cheap transport helicopters. I'm going to choose an Osprey. I'm going to choose 2 of them. because in the opening stage of the game, these guys are critical in delivering troops, so they're very good to have. You have 2 attack helicopters. Depending on what you want, you can get the cheaper one with less missiles, or you can get the more expensive one. In this build, I'm going to choose a little bit more expensive one. And I'm going to try to make an anti-tank helicopter with AA capability. So it's going to be a balanced helicopter. So if we do some perusing, I have eight Hellfire missiles. I have regular unguided rockets. I'm just going to choose the 14 Hydra rockets just to make it a little bit cheaper, a little bit more affordable. And then the 2 AM9 Sidewinders. These guys are really good for taking out other helicopters. And I'm just going to pile on here. And that'll be my helicopter corps for the U.S. So it's not as built out as, let's say, the Russians, but you still have effective units. And the Hellfires and the helicopters absolutely do great work. So we're going to be good for the helicopters. Now we go to the air tab. So the air tab is where the U.S. really shines. So you have a lot of options in terms of playing with different play styles, right? You have this, basically this AC-130. If you look, you have access to cheap Griffin missiles. You have Stormbreakers over here. And let me see. You have regular Hellfires over here. So you have access to a lot of missiles here if you want a missile truck or a missile platform. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose the 10 Griffin missiles. I think I'll just leave it at that just for price. I'm going to choose one of these. I believe you can also carry an airdrop infantry. So I'm going to have one of these ready. The next thing I want to do is I want to choose an air-to-air unit. For the air-to-air unit, you have a couple options. And what I want is I want just a cheap fighter that can handle other threats. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use my F-35 as an air-to-air unit. It has better stealth, and it's just in general going to be able to take out other units from a little bit of a distance. So here I'm going to choose an AMRAAM to have 4 AMRAAMs. And I think 4 AMRAAMs, is that all you get? It is. But for now, I'll just use it because I like using F-35 for that air-to-air purpose, just because you can sort of be at range, take out other units. I thought there was more options. So we'll actually make an edit because I think the F-35 can be used better maybe as like a long-range bomber. So what I'll do is I'll include Stormbreakers. 6 Stormbreakers. I'll do that. So I'll use F-35s as long-range bombers. And then right now, what I'll do is, let me see if I can get the F-18C. I can use this as sort of my long-range air defense. So you have, again, your AMRAAM missiles, and then you have your Sparrow missiles. And one thing you can watch out for is they have a secret type. Passive, I believe, is going to be the one where it's going to be shorter range, but it's not going to go after flares. So it's going to be able to evade enemy countermeasures in terms of flares. So that's a passive. You also have a longer range active, so you can sort of fire quicker. So it just depends on what you want. Let's just make it a lot more long range aircraft. The rockets, you don't need this really, so I'm just going to put more air-to-air missiles. And we'll just, again, AMRAAMs, I guess. And then let's see how many missiles. So we have 6 missiles already here. So we can add more in terms of Sparrows. I think we'll do that. So we'll just make this thing a missile truck. So we have 4 AMRAAMs, 2 Sparrows, and 2 Sidewinders, right? So it's pretty balanced. And so you can make a missile truck in terms of an aircraft and then be absolutely devastating in air-to-air combat. Now, you also have a cannon here, which is somewhat good against helicopters, a couple things like that, but you're not going to use it that much. So I'm going to add this F-18C here. Now, one thing is I did go over, so I'm going to have to take something off. So what I'll do is let me take off these Sparrows. Add a Sparrow here. Let me see the F-35B. What can I take off? I'll just take off these Stormbreakers. I think that should be okay. Let me see. I can add these back. And so there we go. So now we have basically a balanced force. So what do we have here? We have our long range heavy bomber that can launch Griffin missiles. We have our stealth bomber for the US side, which is basically going to be able to launch longer range bombs and missile platforms. So it's going to be very useful in that sense. And then we have our air-to-air fighter here. And what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to take off F-35B and I'm going to add F-18, because typically when you're playing Air Force, you want to have enough fighters to ward off the enemy. If you don't have enough fighters, then the enemy will get air superiority. And once he does, you basically can't bring in the bomber. So I'm going to just have 2 fighters, and then we'll have 2 platforms where we can launch missiles for the US side to make it a high-tech Air Force. So you can do a lot with the US Air Force, but that's going to be our build. And then this is going to be our total build. So if you look over here again, we have good recon infantry, recon tanks even. We have good defensive infantry, good offensive infantry. For tanks, we have our super heavy tanks, our heavy medium tanks, our light tanks, and then we have our anti-missile or anti-tank missiles. We have our supply vehicles, our anti-air. We have our MLRS, our tube artillery. We have our attack helicopter. We have our transport helicopter. We have our AC-130 with long-range missiles. We have F-35B with long-range missiles, and we have F-18 with just air-to-air capability. So very, very balanced build. You can do this multiple ways, but this is just one template. And ultimately, Broken Arrow, you want to be balanced so you can respond to any threat. So this has been the U.S. Marine Corps and Airborne build. For more of these Broken Arrow builds and tutorials, make sure to subscribe, and I'll keep making them. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.